Vermont, about why he opposed Tim Geithner's confirmation. Stay with us. Puddington Bear here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Scott Horton is in the studio with us, still here in snowy New York, in our Firehouse studio. It's snowing all along the East Coast. And joining us from Birmingham, Alabama, is Don Siegelman, the former governor of Alabama. Don Siegelman, welcome to Democracy Now! Once again. We saw you at the Democratic Convention in Denver. Your response to the chair of the House Judiciary Committee issuing a subpoena for Karl Rove.
Well, my spirits are lifted, but we've seen this once before, so it's not a question of John Conyers' commitment. We know he is committed to seeking the truth. I think it's a question of how intense the people of this country feel about reaching the truth, and whether we're going to get behind John Conyers and give him the support he needs by calling, writing, and faxing our members of Congress and telling them that we want justice done, which starts with bringing Karl Rove before the Judiciary Committee. And he can either plead the fifth or tell the truth or lie, but he needs to be before that committee.
What do you want to hear from Karl Rove? What do you believe his involvement was in your prosecution?
Well, I was brought to trial 1 month before the Democratic primary by Karl Rove's best friend's wife, who was the U.S. attorney in the Middle District of Alabama, on charges that the New York Times said have never been a crime in America. Grant Woods, who's was the Republican Attorney General from Arizona, said that they couldn't beat Siegelman fair and square, so they targeted him with this prosecution. We have sworn testimony from a Republican political operative, Jill Simpson, who said that she was on a conversation with my prosecutor's husband, who said that he had talked to Karl Rove, and Rove had spoken to the Department of Justice, and everything was wired in for the Department of Justice to pursue me. But this is more important than my case. As you well know, this effort of bringing Karl Rove before the Judiciary Committee is just a start to get at the truth of not only about who hijacked the Department of Justice and used it as a political tool to win elections, but it's also a start to find out why we got into the war in Iraq. Was it for oil, or was it for weapons of mass destruction? Who authorized torture? Who authorized the wiretaps? Who was involved in stealing elections? But this is far more important than my case or Karl Rove. This is about restoring justice and preserving our democracy. And, you know, Dennis Kucinich is talking about a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but we need an accountability and a responsibility commission as well. We need to make sure that those people who were involved in these nefarious activities are held accountable and are punished, so that these things are less likely to happen again in the future.
Describe what happened, the chronology of events from 2004, when you were indicted, in 2005, your trial, how you were sent to prison. Well,
I think we have to go back a little bit further, because I have done battle with Karl Rove for a number of years, beginning back in 1994. He saw my rise to lieutenant governor, from attorney general, and then to governor, while Republicans were winning other races in Alabama. I was the only Democrat who was winning. We know that Karl Rove is Karl Rove's buddy, Jack Abramoff, and Ralph Reed pumped over $10 million of Indian casino money into Alabama to defeat me beginning in 1998, to defeat my education lottery proposal in 1999, and to defeat me again in 2002. We know that Karl Rove and Jack Abramoff were involved, at least tangentially, in the stealing of my election in 2002. When I walked away from that election, I vowed to run again, to come back and to live another day. My problem started shortly after that, when an investigation was started by the wife of my campaign opponent, his husband, who was who was Karl Rove's best friend in Alabama. And again, I was brought to trial 1 month before the election in 2006 by Bill Canary's wife, Laura Canary, I was convicted on charges that the New York Times said have never been a crime in America. I was sentenced to 7 years in prison. I was shackled, handcuffed, taken to a maximum security prison and put in solitary confinement in Atlanta. I was released, as you know, 9 months later because the 11th Circuit found that there were substantial questions of both law and fact likely to result in a reversal. We had 54 former state attorneys general who weighed in on my behalf, saying that what I was charged with was not a crime. We're waiting for the 11th Circuit to issue their opinion. I remain hopeful about my case. But Amy, again, this discussion shouldn't be about me. I am a part of this, part of the evidence in a case that is building against Karl Rove and others in this administration for using the Department of Justice as a political weapon to win elections. And I think that what we need to do now is get behind John Conyers and Nancy Pelosi, who recently said that she too felt like that the truth must come out with regard to who politicized the Department of Justice.
And Scott Horton, the process that will take place now with John Conyers as the chair saying finally Karl Rove will have to answer. The fact is he could continue not to answer, not to show up. Isn't that right?
Well, I think it's unlikely at this point that he will not show up because he would risk immediate contempt and being sent to prison. I think now we have a Justice Department that would actually enforce congressional contempt sanctions. But I think it's more likely that he's going to do what David Addington did when he was brought before the Judiciary Committee, which is selectively invoke privilege with respect to specific questions and simply
he replaced Scooter Libby as
Chief of Staff for Vice President Cheney. And I think he will simply give non-responsive answers. But, here the invocation of privilege has been very problematic because Karl Rove has been all over the country discussing these matters. He's done it on Fox News. He's done it on other cable network stations. That makes it very difficult for him to say, I can't answer your question.
And how does President Obama, slightly going back and forth on this, saying he wants to move forward, not exactly clear what it means to look backward here, on the issue of holding the Bush administration accountable, issues of detentions, torture? It sounds like he's drawing the line. On the issue of politicization of the Justice Department, do you have a sense of him in a different way? Same with Nancy Pelosi.
I think that they believe that the Bush administration went way too far. But we should also stop and say, don't expect that the Obama White House is going to completely waive executive privilege. They won't do that. I'm sure they'll say Karl Rove is entitled to cite it with respect to his communications directly with President Bush. But all these peripheral matters, he's going to be forced to give answers. And the executive privilege, he's also going to have to answer to the special prosecutor, Ms. Dennehy from Connecticut, and all these things. And she may very well wind up going after him. I think his big concern has been talking about this under oath because that gives rise to new crimes if he makes false statements, and he's very much aware of that. He went through that before with the Valerie Plame matter. He really dodged a bullet in that case. He could very well have been prosecuted.
Don Siegelman, will you be coming to Washington anytime soon from Alabama? And what would you say to President Obama now?
Well, I would say that, one, I wake up every morning with a smile on my face because I know that we have a competent and capable president. We have an African-American as president, and George W. Bush is back in Texas. I would say that with regard to his wanting to look forward rather than backward, I think that's important that he continue to focus on the issues that are important to the future of this country. But part of that is ensuring that our democracy is restored and that the people of this country have faith and trust that the Department of Justice will not be used as a political weapon in the future. And unless we find the full truth about what went on in the Department of Justice, and unless we hold those people accountable and responsible for their behavior, then these issues are likely to become part of our political culture and happen again in the future. Now, keep in mind, too, Amy, the President Bush has had, and Karl Rove has had 8 years to embed his people, those of like ideological mind, within the Department of Justice itself and also in U.S. attorneys' offices, not just as U.S. attorneys, but as assistant U.S. attorneys. And those people also have to be identified. Those who were working on voter fraud cases for the purpose of suppressing black votes have to be ferreted out, and they have to be held accountable. This is not going to be something that is going to happen overnight, but President Obama should be committed to ferreting out the truth and holding those people accountable so that this kind of abuse of our Department of Justice is less likely to happen again in the future.
Governor Don Siegelman, thank you very much for joining us. Former